Okej.
Oj, jag blöder.
Tufft. Kör.
Attic Panic was actually a plan B of sorts. Lotta and I wanted to shoot a film out in the woods, so through the internet, Lotta found out about this really old forest that seemed to have just the right look. So we packed our bags and drove for about half an hour, and then it was about an hour's hike up into the woods. The place did look creepy and cool, but it was already getting dark when we finally got there, and rain was coming, so we ate our packed lunch and figured we'd do the trip again in a couple of days. Then the temperature dropped below freezing and there was snow. Lots of snow. But we figured, hey, even better, that could look cool. And it did. But after we'd shot only half the film, we were not only frozen to our cores and pretty miserable, but when I was going to apply some bloody makeup to Lotta, the effects wax was frozen solid. And so were my fingers, so yeah. We decided to go back home and rethink the second half of the film so we wouldn't need blood, and then come back in a couple of days. Well, by then it was no longer freezing outside, so when we got back, the snow was melting away and constantly falling from the trees. So it was no longer a quiet and spooky forest, but a noisy forest that was getting wetter by the minute. So we figured, screw it, we'll postpone this film until the time when the weather is more stable, and in the meantime we'll make a film indoors. Now, we've already made films in our apartment and in our basement, so this time let's use our attic. That's pretty creepy.
Oj, vad dammig du är i rumpan.
Okay.
The making of this film was pretty straightforward and used a bunch of similar stuff we've used before. First of all, the attic is really dark, so I replaced all the light bulbs with stronger versions. Previously, I've used IKEA halogen lights, but IKEA has since switched to LED lights instead, which have a couple of advantages. They're more robust, and they don't get hot, so you can handle them with your bare hands. And while they output about as much light as a 100-watt bulb, they only use 13 watts. This came in handy because there are no outlets in the attic, so to power extra lights, I had to use my car battery starter thingy. The adapter I use with that can only handle 150 watts, so with LEDs you get a lot more light. To get more bulbs into one socket, I used this converter that I bought from eBay. So in this part of the attic, I augmented the light with an IKEA paper lantern. And in the shots of the ghost, I used my IKEA trash can light since I wanted a top light that was more concentrated down onto the ghost. The bare bulb lit up the surroundings too much. The shot when the sheet is pulled off of the ghost and there's nobody there was actually quite simple. I filmed Lotta getting the sheet pulled off of her. Then she stepped out of the shot, so I had an empty plate to use as a background. Then using Blender, I animated a mask to cut out the parts of Lotta that were showing, and that was pretty much it. It's pretty hard to tell, but the first 2 times that we see light bulbs in the film, they are actually turning. When you shoot a light bulb like this, it's overexposed and doesn't have a lot of details, so in order to make a CGI light bulb look like the real thing, it also has to be overexposed and not have a lot of detail, which makes it hard to tell that it's actually turning. Looking at this shot of the least overexposed of the light bulbs, you can see that it has a little bit of texture showing near the edges. So I downloaded a texture from cgtextures.com that could be made to look kind of similar to that. I then modeled a light bulb shape in Blender, put the texture onto that, and I also modeled this thing that's supposed to be the glowing filament of the bulb. Then playing around with color, exposure, and blurring, I got this. I did the same for this shot, but since it was barely visible anyway, I didn't bother doing it with the rest of the light bulb shots. I figured you get the idea from the sound effect. Something I learned from Lights Out was how much details can get lost depending on what screen you're watching the film on and what settings you have on your computer. When Lotta turns off the lights the last time in Lights Out, the ghost has moved closer to her, but it's in the dark, so a lot of people weren't able to see that. One woman even contacted me and wondered if the film was actually haunted or something because the ghost turned up on her friend's computer, but it wouldn't turn up on her display no matter what she did. So, did you notice the light bulbs turning? For the last shot in the film, my face was a little too visible through the sheet. First, I played around with some slight 3D animation in Blender, but it looked pretty silly. Instead, I took this still from Lights Out and very faintly laid it on top, so if there's a hint of anything, it should be something creepier than my face. Like our other horror shorts, all the sound was added in post. That way you can talk while shooting.
Lås. Och nu kommer spöket. Spöket gör något med handen.
And you get more control over the sound. You still have to record all the sounds at some point though, like the footsteps, the squeaky light bulbs, and all the little sounds that Lotta make.
Nu stressar jag med att blåsa upp låset här.
The audio was mixed in Reaper, and for the soundtrack I used a free plugin called DSK Strings. Recording the soundtrack basically consisted of holding down one key, playing with the pitch bender, and then doing further processing to speed and pitch in Reaper. For the look of the film I used Resolve, and as a starting point I used a Kodak LUT that I found online. A LUT, or lookup table, is basically a file that can change the look of your footage in certain ways. It tells your software, in this case Resolve, that this color is supposed to look like this, and this color is supposed to look like this, and so on. So what this Kodak LUT does is make the image look more as if it was shot on Kodak film. So here's how it looks straight out of the camera. I add a Kodak LUT, then I adjust saturation and play around with curves, some more tweaking of curves, make the image a bit greenish, make the skin tones less greenish, and I shot it with the intention of cropping it to a wider aspect ratio, so let's crop it, and then it's pretty much done.